Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode. Today, we are going to be talking about a theme that has been coming up a lot for the clients that I'm talking to on a regular basis, and that is what to do when your tank is empty. So I'm going to start off by sharing a story, and this is a story of mine, and I can't remember if I've actually shared it on the podcast or not, but this goes back about 5 years ago to a time in my life where I felt like everything was going wrong. Everything I could imagine was wrong. It was a time that it was pre-pandemic. I had 2 small children. I was working full scope family medicine in a busy sort of underinsured population, excuse me. And I couldn't figure out how to keep going. I felt so exhausted all the time. And during that time, I had 2 really close friends who were going to be leaving the clinic. One was moving and one was going to be working at a different job. And I was just frankly heartbroken at the loss of them on top of everything else that seemed to be in total chaos. And I was crying every day on the way to work. And I know that I'm not the only person who has gone through a time like that, because I hear stories like that all the time. But it felt so awful. And it all came to a head one day when I drove in. I think it was a Tuesday morning, and I had looked at my schedule the night before, but when I, got to work and sort of shook the tears away, right, and went into the office, my schedule had changed, and the person who was on first thing had canceled, and in that person's place was a patient of mine that I knew quite well who had really severe anxiety. She had a lot of difficult circumstances in her life. She hadn't responded well to many medications, so she was on a not optimal regimen that wasn't working well, and really had a difficult time engaging with any kind of self-care or therapy or any kind of support. And I remember looking at the schedule and seeing her name and just feeling like I couldn't do it. But of course, being a physician, right, I tried to shake it off, and my medical assistant, started rooming her. And I remember walking down the hall, and again, I was on the verge of tears. My medical assistant had just come out of the room. She handed me the pre-visit summary, we called it, right? Little piece of paper with the vitals and whatever written on it. And my assistant looked at me and she said, "She's in really bad shape today," and then walked back to her desk. And I remember standing there holding this paper, about to go into the room and thinking, what about me? I'm in bad shape today. I'm a mess. Again, I took a deep breath. I entered the room. My patient started talking. She started telling me about, unfortunately, the latest terrible circumstances that were going on and how she wasn't doing well and she wasn't sleeping and, she needed this or that thing. And I let her talk for a few minutes, and then she looked up at me and she looked me in the eye, and she could see that my eyes were red, right? That I didn't look normal to her. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I said to her, through gritted teeth and a clenched jaw, "I'm fine. Let's keep talking." That was a really low moment. And I finished the visit, right? We did whatever it was that we were going to be doing for her that day. And I sent her off. And I just remember feeling so crushed because I felt like every little ounce of empathy that I had for anybody in the world was gone. And I consider myself a highly empathic person. I identify as an empath. I've talked about that before, right? I am able to really resonate with other people's feelings, not all the time, of course, but much of the time. And my empathy, my compassion for this other human being in difficult circumstances was just nothing, right? Because I felt so, I don't even know what the word would be. I just felt so empty. And it was jarring and it was upsetting. And quite frankly, I didn't know what to do. And I got through the day, right? Because we keep going, right? We troop on. Yeah. You can find stories, right, of surgeons who continue to operate when they themselves are deep into appendicitis or any number of other just crazy, terrible circumstances, right? We soldier on. There are some elements of that may be considered admirable, but there are other elements of it that are inhuman. And I won't go on a diatribe about that right now. I could, but I won't. I'm going to choose to stay focused here. But many of my clients recently have been sharing with me that they feel that their empathy and their compassion for the humans is eroded. They feel empty. And it's not always just our empathy or compassion for others. It might be our physical energy. It might be that we are constantly on the verge of tears or yelling, right? Because we are just barely holding our stuff together. My friends, when we are on empty, that is a sign that something has to change. And most of the time, I'm sad to tell you, that change has to come from you. Not to say that you can't ask for help, not to say that you don't deserve help or you can't get help, simply to say that other people often miss out on the fact of how deeply we are struggling because we are high achieving human beings, right? We look like we have it all together. We, might be severely depressed or have deep anxiety, and yet we're neatly dressed. We show up for work on time, right? We get through the day. We show up to the kids' soccer practice. Like we do all the things. We're very good at masking how we're feeling. And so it's no wonder that other people will be surprised. Sadly, if we look at the examples of colleagues that we've lost to suicide, right? Many of them probably looked okay. They probably looked okay enough to the people around them. And if they didn't, other people around them may not have approached them to ask if they needed help. Or if they did, that individual might have said, no, I'm fine, right? And sent them off because we often have a real problem with accepting help or admitting that we're struggling. And that has to change. But that is also not the subject because I really want to focus today on what do we need to do when we find ourselves on empty. You are not wrong or broken if you find yourself in this way, and you don't have to be as broken as someone else, right? Other people have different circumstances than you. They may have the exact same job or they may have a different job, right? Amongst physicians, right? We do a lot of different kinds of work, right? But you don't have to compare your suffering to other people. You don't have to make it better or worse than other people to feel like you are on empty, right? You recognizing that you've got nothing left to give, that you are on the verge of tears or screaming or, wanting to have a Thelma and Louise moment, right? And just drive off that cliff. Unfortunately, these things are more common than we recognize, and you are not broken if you are feeling this way. And it doesn't have to be that extreme either. I'm giving some extreme examples, right? But many of us are just walking around on empty most of the time, or we've got such a low level in our tank, right, that we're just riding on fumes all the time. So let's talk about some things that we can do. I'm going to talk about 3 sort of general areas, and I'm going to give some specific examples of things that you can do, but think about what makes sense for you. Think about the intensity of what you're feeling, what supports and resources you have, and please, please, please reach out for help. That's the most important thing. So the first thing that we may need when we are feeling empty is rest. And rest might be sleep for some, right? It might be that we simply need brain or body rest, right? We may be so overwhelmed, so consumed by all the feelings that we are not functioning. And there is no benefit to continuing to push and push and push through that over and over and over again, because our functioning will get worse and worse. We are not designed to always be on in that way. And our thinking will not become more clear, right? Our thinking might become more dangerous. It might lead to harm of other people or self, right? It can lead to a lot of things. What do I mean by rest? Again, it might be sleep, it might be brain or body rest, and that's going to look different for different people. Sometimes what we need to do is to figure out how to get more rest on a regular basis into our day-to-day, right? We need to figure out, how do I go to bed even when there's stuff that's not done? How do I put aside these responsibilities, ask for help with them, let some things go so that I can rest more? How do I put myself to bed? How do I actually help myself fall asleep, right? These are all things that we may need to have some help and support around. Some people are going to need more rest than that. Some people are going to need to take leave, right? FMLA leave, if you qualify, which most of us do working in big organizations, right? But even if you don't qualify for FMLA leave, right? Even if you're working in a small practice or you work for yourself, you may still need to shut your doors and take care of yourself, because your life is always more important than the job. That is not what we have been led to believe much of the time. It is not how we operate, but you and your life are more important than the job that you do. And it's really important to understand that, because obviously we have lost too many people. And I don't mean to keep talking about physician suicide, but it is a very real phenomenon. And it's important to recognize that these were not necessarily chronically depressed people who, shouldn't have been in medicine in the first place. These were often wonderful physicians who felt so overwhelmed and like they couldn't get help that they took it to an extreme. I remember not long after the story that I described happened that I decided to take leave. And it sort of came to a head when I had a few nights where I could not sleep. I could not sleep. I was so anxious and overwhelmed and worried that I could not fall asleep. And at that point, I was really worried that I was going to hurt someone. As far as I know, I didn't have any near misses. I, never received any reports of harm. I never saw any mistakes from that period, but I was afraid because, of course, as a physician, right, I do work that could hurt people. And it was really important to me that I not hurt people. And so I took FMLA leave. And we could argue, some people might have thought that was selfish. I didn't tell any of my coworkers or colleagues, really. Most of them had no idea what was going on. I didn't talk about it with many, many people. I just took the time. It doesn't matter exactly what the reasons are that go down on that paperwork. What matters is you taking the time and space and the rest that you need in order to become a functional human being again. And I don't want to suggest that leave alone and sleep alone is going to magically change anything, because as we've talked about before, that doesn't work either, right? We don't just go on vacation or just have time off and magically we're better, right? We need to make some very intentional changes. But sometimes we absolutely need rest, and rest has to come first so that we are not dangerous to ourselves or dangerous to other people. Okay, that was heavy. Sorry, that was not my intention, but we have to talk about this stuff. So, the next thing that we may be needing that I'd like to talk about is the need for comfort. Sleep, we all know, is a biological need. Comfort is one that we definitely talk about much less often. And comfort comes in many forms, but in here, I'll sort of put in the bucket physical comfort, right? As well as emotional comfort. And we could call that emotional safety, right? Physical comfort means that there are things that our body needs. And that includes basic things like, feeding ourselves when we're hungry and using the bathroom and being able to respond to some of those things. But as humans, we also have a need for physical contact with other people sometimes, right? We have a need to be nurtured and loved. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the next section as well. But there are studies that show that people who go without hugs do worse than people who go and have a certain number of hugs a day. The magic number I've heard is 12. 12 is what we need to thrive. 8 is what we need to stay alive. Physical contact with other people and taking care of our physical body's needs at the basics, right? Hunger, taking care of eating, drinking, using the bathroom, getting off of our feet, resting, sleeping, like all of those things go into that bucket. But we also need emotional safety and comfort, right? We also need to be in spaces where it is okay for us to have feelings. It is okay to express feelings. It is okay to be human and not to be seen as this professional robot, which we are definitely not. When we have comfort, when we have emotional, psychological safety, maybe not in every single place that we are, but when we have it in places, right? Whether that's at home, whether that's with colleagues, with friends, right? It could be in a variety of circumstances. That is how we are going to be able to help refill our tank, right? If you don't have psychological safety and the support you need emotionally, it is very difficult to get your tank full, right? It is very difficult to continue having empathy, even if you've always been a highly empathic person. At the time that this was going on in my life, I did not have psychological safety at work. I felt like I was constantly being picked on. I felt like it wasn't safe for me to speak up. There were a lot of things, and I completely recognized that there were some difficult circumstances there. There were a lot of people experiencing burnout there. There was a lot of sort of a shame and blame game going on, and a lot of pointing fingers in various directions, and kind of a lot of not great behavior. I can now take a lot of ownership for, sort of how I was doing, and I was doing the best that I can. But I can also recognize that other people around me were hurting, and we were all sort of deflecting hurt onto each other. That was not a comfortable, safe environment for me to be in struggle. And it's part of the reason why there was so much secrecy and shame around taking leave, right? I didn't feel like it was safe to speak up. I didn't feel like people had my back. And regardless of whether they did or didn't, it's important for us to feel like others have our back. Again, it might not be every single person in your life, but we need to have some people who you trust, some people who will step in and help out, some people who will take care of you, right? That is emotional and psychological safety. And you need to know that the feelings that are occurring in you are normal, right? That having emotions is human and it's necessary, and our feelings are there to tell us stuff, and that we are not our feelings, right? If I'm constantly feeling angry and irritable and overwhelmed and frustrated, I am not composed of those things. I am a human being who is experiencing those emotions, and I need to be involved in helping to create a different experience. That isn't to say that I'm to blame for my emotions. That isn't to say that I'm the only one who has a role. But it is really important to acknowledge that sometimes we are not being sort of emotionally or psychologically safe with ourselves, right? We're in such denial about what we feel, or we're shaming and blaming and judging ourselves. That creates a huge disconnection inside that is extremely uncomfortable, right? That is the opposite of the comfort that we need. This episode is turning a little darker than I intended. And I'm just going to own it. I'm not going to apologize for it, but I think that there is a need, again, to discuss some of these difficult things. So I'm just going to roll with it. So, take a pause if you need to, but let's keep going. The next thing that I want to highlight in sort of thinking about filling our tank is connection. And I talked about this in last week's episode, right? This idea that we are surrounded by people all day, usually in most of the settings we are in, right? Whether we're in clinic or, we're in the hospital or some other kind of medical setting, most of the time we are surrounded by people, and yet we can be feeling very lonely. How is that possible, right? It doesn't seem possible that that could be true, but being surrounded by people is not the same as being connected to people. Brené Brown talks about the difference between belonging and fitting in, right? And she talks about fitting in as being the energy of like, I'll be whoever you want me to be. Just let me be here. Let me be part of this, right? Versus the idea of belonging, where we can show up and be our authentic selves and be part of something that's bigger than us, right? Being part of a group, being part of family for some, right? There are lots of different ways that we might belong in different spaces, right? But fitting in is about hustle, and it's about sort of fighting for our worthiness, right? And belonging is being very centered in our authentic selves and being worthy, right? And that comes up when we talk about connection, because we have been trained to fit in. If we didn't already have the experience that most of us had in middle school, right? Trying to scramble for our identity and figure out who we are and, try and be cool like these people over here, maybe, so we can fit in, right? Even without that, right? Literally through our medical school rotations, where we are, with a new group of people every 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, right? We are constantly trying to fit in with those groups, right? Because it was very important for us to fit in, whether we were on a general surgery rotation or an ophthalmology or an OBGYN, a dermatology, right? Constantly sort of shifting our identities, trying to be a part of that group. That is the setup. I don't know any other way to say it. That is how most medical schools are conducted, unless they have made sweeping changes in the past 20 years, which would probably be just fine with me, but okay, that's for another time. We got really good at fitting in, and many of us have kept going with that, right? We still know how to fit in, but within the culture of medicine, we don't always get the chance to belong. And it's not completely off the table, but there are these professional identities, right? These professional masks that we feel compelled to wear, right? That we feel it's safest to wear, that we don't want to show up as our authentic self because what will other people think of us? When we are in that space, and when we are in that space constantly, we are not connecting with other humans because we are not letting ourselves be seen. And I don't want to suggest that there's not, a need for professional boundaries with patients to, present a professional appearance or, to speak in a respectful way. I'm not suggesting that at all. But most of us probably shouldn't be having, frequent, deep human connections with our patients. That's not generally the work that we do, although we do have those moments for sure. And depending on the exact work we do, maybe more so than others, they may need that human connection, but it's probably not the same exact kind of human connection that you would have with your family members or your close friends, right? So there is this need for a professional distance. But let's put patient care aside for just the moment, right? And let's think about feeling connected to people that you work with, feeling connected to your family at home, feeling connected to yourself. We need connection. Again, going back to Brené Brown, she talks about we are hardwired for connection, right? We literally needed that for survival as babies and young children, right? We relied on adults. And so, we gave them cues. We look them in the eye, we smile, we laugh, we learn social cues, we learn to read the room, right, at a very young age, because we need connection to those humans who will take care of us to allow us to survive in order to grow big enough to be independent, right? That is innate in us from the beginning, right? And infants and caregivers who do not connect, right, those infants do not thrive. But that need for connection, although it changes over time, right? I might not be dependent on people to feed me in that way, right? As I needed that when I was an infant, right? But I still need human connection with people. And if I don't have human connection with people and I'm constantly pouring empathy and compassion out of my tank into the patients that I'm serving, perhaps into coworkers and, people around me in the office, I might be that go-to person for answering questions. And I always want to say yes, because I don't want to disappoint people, right? People pleasers know what I'm talking about here. I may be the person at home that is the one who solves all the problems and everybody goes to when they're crying. If I am constantly pouring out of that tank and I am not feeling connected to myself or to these other humans, that tank will get empty. We need connection. We need to be able to be seen and heard and validated. We need to have moments of shared emotions with people, whether that's laughter and joy and playfulness, but also sadness and grief, right? As much as we might not like going to a funeral, right? That experience of coming together in grief, right? And being able to celebrate a person's life is meaningful. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been doing funeral rituals as humans for however many thousands of years, right? There is a closure there that connects us, and it's necessary. Oh, okay. I'm taking a deep breath here. I want to recap. So when you are feeling like your tank is empty, there are three major things that I want you to start thinking about, and you may need to sit with this, but think about where you're at in terms of getting your needs met for rest, comfort, and connection. And you may be doing okay in one area, you may be doing poorly in all three, right? There is a range of experiences, there is a range of needs. And I'm going to go back to this. We do not need to compare our suffering to other people. As bad as I was feeling in those moments, I could have chosen to call up, some colleagues who were doing what I considered harder work, right? Who were maybe in a more intense specialty, right, than I was, who were working 72-hour call shifts or, something crazy. I might have looked at them and said, oh, well, I can't complain, right? My situation doesn't justify that. That serves no one. That serves no one when we do that. It's totally normal if we do, and if that's our instinct, and it's totally normal if we're sort of people pleasers without boundaries, right? And we like, well, I can't be suffering because I have all these things I should be grateful for, and I don't do that work. That seems really hard. And I don't have to struggle with this. And well, I have a partner and any number of other reasons that we can come up with. We can do that all day long. We can always find somebody who has a worse situation than us. That does not help us to be able to engage with things to feel better. And I would say, absolutely, it makes the situation worse. So please don't do that. Please don't compare your suffering and see it as not good enough, not enough suffering to be able to get help with getting the rest, the comfort, and the connection that you need. This is challenging work. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that. When people get started with this work, it feels incredibly uncomfortable. And since we're usually coming from a place where we didn't feel great, and we start thinking about our needs more and thinking about how our needs are not getting met and how we want more for ourselves, and starting to realize that we deserve it, right? That we shouldn't have to hustle for it, that we are worthy just as we are. It does not always feel good. It does not always feel good to take time to rest. It does not feel good to tell people, no, I can't do that. I can't join that committee. I can't help you out with this patient today. I'm too exhausted and overwhelmed. That does not feel good, right? Especially if you're a people pleaser, right? That feels unsafe to you. Let's acknowledge that. Because sometimes when people are working on this, they find themselves very disappointed and frustrated that they're not feeling better now. But if those things haven't changed, right? If you realize that your tank is empty and you have been trying to justify over and over again why it shouldn't be empty, right? How this situation should be better and this one and this one and this one, right? Kind of resisting your circumstances in a very normal human way that we all do, right? Trying to argue that things should be better and that people should recognize you for your worth now. I hear you. I feel you. I've been you. I still am you sometimes because we're all a work in progress. Understand that it takes changing a lot of things to feel better. And we can point to all the circumstances that are making your life difficult. And I invite you to acknowledge those circumstances, right? To not resist them, to not say they shouldn't be that way and that this thing should be better and that should and shouldn't, because then we're adding judgment to it. And we can acknowledge that we have hard circumstances in our lives, right? We can lay it out. We can look at it and say, this thing alone would be quite challenging to deal with. And yet I've also got this and this and this, right? And we can line those things up and we can look at them and say, yeah, that's hard. Humans going through these circumstances, generally, that's a big challenge. I get it. I feel you. But when we start telling ourselves that it shouldn't be that way, that things shouldn't be this hard, we're adding resistance in there. And when we add resistance into this situation, we are not helping ourselves and we are often going to struggle more and more, right? Because we've added this extra layer of stuff. So we have to let go of that resistance and accept this is the way it is. We might need to grieve that things aren't different, right? That ideas that we had about our career, our employer, our family, our relationship haven't worked out the way that we want to. Accept it, feel our feelings, and decide what we're going to do next, right? That is a very common part of all of this. And we're going to have to decide that we're worthy of rest and comfort and connection and realize that no one hands us those things. Someone could take a call shift from you, right? So that you can go and rest and relax, but that doesn't actually create rest and relaxation, right? You have to actually take the steps of putting yourself to sleep, for example, right? Of doing things that rest your body, doing things that help you to get the sleep, and decrease your sleep debt. Like, you are the only one who can do that, unfortunately. The same is true of comfort and connection. People might be all around you trying to support you. And in your resistance and your anger and your frustration, You are sort of swiping them away, right? Because you're like, I can't be around one more human. When honestly, what we often need is connection. We might need rest first, right? We might need to go and fall asleep. We might need to do some other practice, right? That really helps us. But we need to be the one who allows connection to happen. People cannot force connection on us. Same way with comfort, right? People cannot wrap you up in a fuzzy blanket, right? And say, see, now you're comfortable and you feel instant comfort. That's just not how that works. These are internal states, right? We have to have thoughts that support them. We have to take steps that support them. And that includes, like I said, the uncomfortable work sometimes of saying no, of setting boundaries, right? Of being willing to disappoint people. It's hard. That's why more people don't do it. But that doesn't mean it's not worth it. Because when you are intentionally putting rest and comfort and connection on your list of priorities, where you're scheduling activities that bring you these things, where you're being intentional about it, rather than just hoping that things feel better, you are creating a different experience of your life. Let me touch briefly on some practices that you might want to choose. I recommend that people start putting time on their calendar for some of these activities. And that might be that you put some blank space on your calendar on a day at the end of the day when you know you're going to feel exhausted, right? Maybe you know that every Thursday after working all week, and maybe Thursday is a particularly hard day, you are brain dead, right? And you always have work to do, but you often procrastinate and find yourself just like, laying on the couch watching Netflix, elbows deep in a pint of ice cream. And that's not actually helping you. And then you feel guilty that you procrastinated, right? That is not rest. But if you put rest time on your calendar and you intentionally have a short list of activities or a menu, if you will, of things that you can turn to that you do intentionally on Thursday night when you're brain dead, that is an act of self-care. That is moving forward with creating a specific plan to help you feel more rested, right? And things that might be on your rest menu might include taking a warm bath. It might include doing some yoga. It might include intentionally watching TV, but doing it by choice rather than just, kind of flopping by default, telling yourself you'll get up in 20 minutes and start working, and then 3 hours have gone by, right? Those are different experiences, right? Choose to watch TV if you want to. Don't just roll into it. There is a difference. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. Create a little menu. And you can do the same for what's your menu for comfort? What's your menu for comfort of things that take 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, right? 20 minutes might be a bath. 1 minute might be that you do some stretching. You do some deep breathing, right? You ask someone for a hug. Ask an appropriate person for a hug, right? Someone who is willing to give you a hug and that is okay to hug, but you might ask for a hug, right? So have a comfort menu, have a connection menu, right? And again, rest and comfort might need to come first. If you are feeling really peopled out and you're kind of an introvert, you might need to put the connection towards the end, but don't discount it. Don't leave it off. Take the time to have moments of connection. And again, there might be little moments of connection, right? Where you stop and you talk to, a coworker and you share a laugh or, some other kind of little moment of connection, right? You ask them how they are, you ask them about their kids or, what they did that weekend, and you listen. And reflexively, they do it back, we hope, right? They engage. Little moment of human connection might take a minute or two, right? Have times when you have other deeper, longer moments of connection, right? Where you spend time with a friend or a child or someone that you care about, right? And you get to show up as you and they get to show up as them. There's no pretense. It's just about spending time together and valuing each other. Again, I'm going to say it again. You might need the rest and comfort first, right? Especially if you're peopled out, but don't neglect that need for connection just because you tell yourself you shouldn't feel lonely because you're surrounded by people all day. Surrounded by people all day does not fix loneliness. Imagine your life with all the challenges that you currently have, but showing up, feeling rested, showing up, knowing that you have your own back, that you've got people in your corner that love you and support you, and you can do hard things, right? And I don't say that to wash away the stresses of the world, right? Because we deal with difficult circumstances all the time. We do that as humans, we do that as physicians. But imagine how much easier and more capable things will be, right? When you are feeling rested, comforted, and connected, right? When you are feeling at the top of your game, if you will, right? Elite athletes don't deprive themselves of rest and comfort and connection in order to do the things. They do hard things. They do a different flavor of hard things. Let's be honest about that. But they are taking care of themselves in order to perform at that level. And we were not taught to do that, and we should be. So that's what I'm teaching you. All right. I'm calling it a day here. I'm going to stop talking. Please share this episode with a friend. Please talk about it with other people. Please send me a message if this resonates with you. I'd love to hear from you. Find ways to fill up your tank. I'd love to say that someone should do this for you. I would love to say that the healthcare system didn't thrive off draining us. Right now, that seems like the circumstances to me. Take care of yourself. Figure out how to do it. Figure out how to say no to others, right? Figure out how to set boundaries and accept the discomfort that comes with that in order to have the rest, comfort, and connection that you need. My friends, thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.
Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.